Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live where Rachel G and I will begin a journey on the topic of boundaries. This is a very broad and complex topic where one could speak for hours and hours talking about it. So, in order to fully dissect it, that's why we decided. I can see that Rachel wants to get in. Let me tell you that we decided to break it up into several parts to give us all a chance to talk about it with the depth that it deserves. Let me see. I get Rachel G. And sorry for the delay. And so in the meantime, oh yes, she's over here. Hi Rachel, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Letitia. And you?
Good. I was just trying to explain very shortly why we decide to talk about the topic of boundaries in several chapters. We decided to divide it in several chapters. And would you like to add anything else about the choice of this topic?
Well, I mean, personal boundaries have always been this hot topic, right? And there's certainly an important aspect of self-care. And for many of my clients, this is actually an area that they struggle with. And we've seen a great deal of emphasis on boundaries since the pandemic. So learning to be clear with your boundaries is super important, not only for your emotional health, but it's also critical in creating healthy relationships. And I think it also really helps to increase your self-esteem and reduce stress and anxiety and depression. So yeah, it's important. So
Yeah, it is. It is important. So, if we want to talk about, first of all, we want to define boundaries, right? So, as you said, this is such a hot topic, and everybody right now is talking about boundaries, and we have a lot of information through posts or podcasts or videos, and we get so many inputs to the point that it might be quite confusing about what boundaries are, how we have to set them in a healthy way, and when they are violated. So, if I want to answer in a very simple way to this question, I would say that boundaries are whatever it feels okay for you or not. So, it's that set of guidelines, rules, and limits that you outline beyond which you don't want others to go and to which you respond in a certain way whenever they are crossed.
yeah,
Right?
absolutely. Yeah, totally. I agree. It's really being clear about yourself, where basically you end and another begins. It's also clarifying, like you said, that what's okay with you and what's not okay with you, and it actually helps to teach other people how it is that you want to be treated. Um, and really, boundaries do require balance. And what you usually find, there is a tendency to have either too strong or too weak boundaries, which then become problematic. And in most cases, this out of balance is really rooted in psychological attachments such as rejection, deprivation, and control attachments. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you talk about it because when we are talking about when we start with this concept of boundaries, obviously it is in our childhood, during our childhood, during the process of individuation or separation, which means that is about the age of 4, and it's the moment that the child start creating the concept of self as being separated by from his parents, their parents, and they start noticing that they are an entity with a physical body, and they start the concept of possession: what is mine and what is not mine. So it's in this important phase of the development of the self, the parents play a very important role in what it will be later the settings of the boundaries,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And a good
Yeah.
example of that, actually, Letitia, is like of this boundaries being formed is when a parent or a guardian is asking a child to share his or her toys. with their siblings or with other children. But the child really just wants to continue to play uninterrupted. But as parents, we need to, you know, or I know that as a parent myself, that we've encountered children who hardly maybe want to share, and those that easily want to share with their toys. And it's actually really a delicate process, because you want to ensure that you're teaching not too much of one side or too less of another, whilst also basically taking into consideration the needs of your child. And for the child, it can become quite confusing. Say, for example, the child is being instructed to always share his or her games and toys with other children who come to visit them. And then when they go and get invited to another child's home, they're expected actually to just respect the toys of that child and not to touch them if that child doesn't wish it.
Exactly, you're talking about me. I was the eldest in my family, so this was related to my siblings. I needed to share with them my toys. But for example, my sister was the one that she was really attached to her toys. So my parents were telling me, let her play with her toys. It doesn't matter if you can't. But since I was the oldest, the message there was like, no, you need to give up your toys whenever she wants them. And the same was with the other kids. So the message was quite confusing, and what as a codependent, later on I developed this codependency symptoms. It was because I was not taught of what is really mine. I mean, what I was taught is to respect others' boundaries, others' possessions, but not mine, and which I found it quite common in all codependents. And later on, I mean, we started with the possession, so the material boundaries, but later on the child might have also other type of violation regarding boundaries, which are not just related to material things, because when we talk about boundaries, it's not just one thing. There are different types of boundaries. And one thing that I want to say is that personal boundaries are invisible. It's not something, it's not a fence that you see visibly. And it's something that is unique to our personality. So what is important is okay for me might not be for somebody else. And because this comes from the way we were grown up, we grew up, and the way we interpret the boundaries, that we live them, so the way we also react with them. And boundaries, as I said, since they are invisible, they are expressed with words and behaviors.
Yeah.
So I said there are different types of boundaries, and so would you like to explain the different types of boundaries?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there are 6 types of boundaries. So the first one is like physical boundaries, and this is kind of referring to your personal space, the physical touch, and you can kind of determine your healthy boundaries by having this awareness of what it is that's actually appropriate and what isn't for you, in terms of, like, I don't know, handshakes, hugs, kisses, or in any various setting that you might find yourself in, and with any types of relationships that you engage yourself in. And an example of a violation then would be if someone actually touches you when you don't want them to, or when they invade your personal space. I know that I used to have someone at work who used to really kind of get in my face when they wanted to speak to me, and I found it quite, off-putting. Or for somebody maybe just, who starts rummaging through your things in your bedroom. I know I had a client once who, their mother was continuously always going into their room and going through their stuff, which they found was an invasion of their own privacy. Then we've got sexual boundaries. Now, this refers to, like, the emotional, the intellectual, and the physical aspects of sexuality. And a good example here, shall we say, of a healthy sexual boundary is where there is a good mutual understanding and respect of the limitations and the desires between you and your sexual partner. And in regards to, let's say, a violation here would be when you get unwanted sexual touch or a pressure to engage in some sexual act, or somebody who's leering, you know, gazing at you in maybe an inappropriate way, or giving you some sexual comments that you find offensive. Then you have, thirdly, material boundaries, which we kind of discussed, but you know, for an adult, then we're referring to maybe money and possessions. And knowing and setting what your limits are here is, you know, you want to know what it is that you want to share, what you want to lend, and with whom. That's healthy. For example, it might be that you find it appropriate to lend, I don't know, your car or something to a family member, but you probably wouldn't actually do that with somebody that you just recently got to know. And an example maybe of a violation would be, let's say that someone steals or damages your possessions, or somebody tries to pressure you in giving or lending, you know, telling them that you need to lend your possessions to them. And then the fourth one is mental, sometimes referred to as intellectual boundaries. And this is more around like thoughts and ideas. Basically here you could say that a healthy one is having the respect for another person's ideas and the awareness of what it is that's deemed appropriate for discussion. Like maybe, should I be talking about the weather, or can I talk about politics, you know? And then there's the violation here would occur, let's say, when someone is dismissing or belittling your thoughts or ideas. Number 5, let's say emotional boundaries. This refers more to our feelings. So really to keep healthy emotional boundaries here, that includes things such as like knowing your limitations on when and when not to share personal information. For example, during the development of a relationship, it's best to quite gradually share your personal information rather than like, you know, start revealing everything and to all and sundry. So and someone who is criticizing you or belittling you or invalidates your feelings, this is also then actually in fact a violation. And you can, I mean, basically you can feel however you want to feel, and no one should be telling you that that is invalid in any way. And then lastly, the time boundaries, which refer to how a person uses their time. You know, setting enough time for each area of your life, such as your work, your relationships, your hobbies, and your health, you know, is important. And they can be violated when you allow another person to demand actually too much of your time. And just an important point I want to emphasize here, Letitia, is other people do not actually violate your boundaries. You violate your boundaries by allowing others to violate them. And there are 3 top reasons why we don't permit ourselves to set healthy boundaries. And that's associated with guilt, fear, and doubt, which I think, Letitia, you're going to talk some more about, right?
Yeah, I will talk about them. And I was listening to you when you were talking about the different types of boundaries, and I can relate to all of them, all the type of violation. And as you said, the others were not violating my boundaries. It was me violating my own boundaries, but just because I didn't know what boundaries were.
Yeah.
And especially in the last part of you were talking about the violation of the time boundaries. When you have your time, but the people, your own spare time, and the people think that because you have spare time, you are available.
Yeah.
Where that's not the case. But let's going back to what you asked me about the 3 underneath emotions that are running when we have weak or rigid boundaries. Because something that we didn't say is that when we talk about boundaries, we are not only talking about the lack of them or the weak boundaries, but also the people who have rigid boundaries, because in both situation they are not balanced. They are not really there is something underneath, and the 3 emotions that you were talking about, the fear, the guilt, and the doubt, they are running, and they are causing the people not to have a misconception about what boundaries are. So and it all depends on our childhood, as I said, our upbringing and how we internalize them. if it's a defense mechanism, if it's a lack of defense mechanism, instead of being something that we use in an appropriate way with depending on the situation or people. So talking about the emotion of fear, I just want to say that fear appears in setting boundaries for the people who have weak boundaries or lack of boundaries, when they when they perceive that by setting those boundaries, they will be judged, they will be isolated, they will be rejected, therefore abandoned. While on the other side, for people who have rigid boundaries, the fear, the emotion of fear is all about fearing, having the perception that if they allow people to cross their boundaries, they might control them. So a clear example can be about the house, the house of the person who has weak boundaries can be like totally open, fully open. I mean, everybody can get in. And the other one with the rigid boundaries is the house fully fenced, right? So one has the fear of being controlled by others. The other one has the fear of being rejected or abandoned. So regarding instead the emotion of guilt, in the case of people who have weak boundaries or no boundaries, the guilt plays its role when they are over-explaining. And this is especially for, the codependents. They feel ashamed to have prioritized their needs over others' needs. So they feel ashamed, they start over-explaining. So they say this no, and they start explaining, but I told you no because really I need to do so many things. I can't just, they over-explain it. And guilt on the other side plays its role when they start blaming others.
Yeah.
They don't want to feel this guilt, so they start blaming. They don't want anybody to tell them what to do, how to feel. So especially in case of emotional boundaries, they don't want anybody to say you should feel in this way, and then we have the last one is doubt. It's very clear. I mean, if we talk about codependence people, or we talk about people with weak boundaries, we are talking about people who don't really know who they are. So they don't even question what are their thoughts, what they want, what is their opinion. So whenever they find themselves in a conversation, they mold themselves to others' opinion. While the people who have rigid boundaries on the other side, what they do is they become very aggressive. They don't want their truth to be questioned. I don't know if it ever happens to you to meet people with rigid boundaries. It's like they become very aggressive. They don't want you to say anything about their behavior, what they want, and they're about their possession or their mental boundaries. So all of them, they go underneath, they are hiding the one element, which is self-trust.
Yeah.
These people who have weak boundaries or rigid boundaries, they don't trust themselves. And I know it's pretty easy to figure out that people don't trust themselves when they have weak boundaries. And it's kind of difficult to believe that people with rigid boundaries, they don't trust themselves because they give this impression of being really confident about themselves. But if you think about it, people who are really confident, they can be assertive without repressing others. They can still set healthy boundaries without being this at the detriment of others, because the mentality of the people who establish set healthy boundaries are more like, are more like a win-win. They want to be in a win-win situation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever find yourself in this type of situation. I was. I mean, boundaries for me was such a difficult thing to work on.
Yeah, I mean, it's something growing up, certainly through my 20s and my 30s. I think I really didn't learn boundaries until I was into my 40s. Um, and it was exhausting, actually, not having boundaries. Looking back on it, I can see why why I would behave in sometimes in the way that I was behaving, and it was purely just through continually feeling pulled and pushed from pillar to post. I was doing it. I didn't recognize that back then, but I was doing it. But when you talk about the person with having these rigid boundaries, and that they might look as if they're self-confident, they're actually completely the opposite. They're very insecure, which is why they
Mhm.
need to have these because that makes them feel safe, because they are so
Right.
insecure. And I recognize it from my ex-husband. So and it can come across as that they get angry and they want to blame, and anything to get the attention away from them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Me too, me too. I went through all this type of violation of all the boundaries. And the first that I had to work through, it was the physical boundaries. Honestly, it was the physical boundaries because I remember that, especially in a house with other siblings, it's very, I mean, what is mine, it's others, it's kind of difficult to establish. So there were moments where it's like I didn't have my own clothes,
No.
my
Yeah.
own thing, and where I couldn't say this is my underwear because whoever was there to use it, obviously clean, but was there to use it. But was there to use it. And there were moments, I mean, that the toothbrush was the same for everybody. So it was like, which one is mine? So it was kind of, and so growing up in this, and I know it might sound terrible, but I think that it's more common than we think.
Right.
Growing up where these physical boundaries are not really respected, and where the child doesn't really learn what is physical boundaries. So I was thinking about going for the next chat, the next live, by talking about physical boundaries and why they are important, as they are one of the most fundamental boundaries that we need to set. That
Yeah.
is about our body and our entity as existing entity in this world, and whatever is ours.
Yeah, like we said, it's about, where do you end and where does another person start, and getting very clear on that. And if you're not clear on it, then, I mean, like I said, it can have you being pushed from pillar to post, and really um, not not being able to understand maybe what it is that you're doing to actually cause the problem yourself. If you're unclear, you and you don't understand what your boundaries are and what they look like, then you're going to always get into struggles in relationships, without a doubt. It's a hard
Oh, for
lesson to
sure.
learn, but once you learn it, um, it's one of the best self-care tools that you can apply. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Maybe
for
there is a
sure.
question or anything by anybody who is maybe on watching and maybe want to have a chatting conversation.
In the meantime that we wait, I just want to say that they are, I mean, boundaries are the foundation of good and healthy relationships.
Yeah.
For sure. No matter, I'm not talking about just romantic relationship, any type of relationship with your colleagues, with your siblings, with your family members, at work, friends, whoever. So this one was just an introduction to this topic. And I was thinking about not only with the next chapter talking about physical boundaries, not only talking about, but also giving some tips, maybe some script, some way that we can handle to our client, to our audience, about how they can be more assertive and establish healthy boundaries. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's great. Maybe also, depending on time and how much that will take up, is also to talk about maybe what the signs are of what unhealthy, if you've got unhealthy boundaries. You know, some people might not understand what that is. You know, well, what does an unhealthy boundary look like? How is that showing up in my life today? So, you know,
Yeah.
an easy one for now is to say that, well, you know, if you're always saying yes to something when in actual fact you mean no, that is a sign. Yes, it's a sign of being a people pleaser, but it's also a sign of the fact that you haven't got a clear and healthy boundary in place. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So I think we can wrap it up. We can say bye for now, and let's meet for our next live about physical boundaries. So what are the symptoms of when they are violated, and tips on setting them in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think one question to leave the people listening to think about would be, which end of the street does your tendency to reside? Do you at the house that has got the doors open, the windows open, and everyone can come in and out, and you feel a bit like a doormat? Or are you living at the other end of the street where it's all closed in, nobody can come in and nobody can go out? Just have a think. Where are you on that scale? Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much, Rachel, and see you next time.
Yep.
Bye, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Yes, thanks for listening.